Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Introduction. Opening scene. Start with a dramatic hook to grab attention. For example, show historical footage, paintings, or animations of a battlefield. Soldiers marching, cannons firing, and the American flag being raised. Accompany this with the voiceover. What if one war could change the course of history forever? What if a small group of rebels, against all odds, stood up to the most powerful empire in the world and won? Brief overview of the American Revolution's significance. After the opening scene, shift to the narrator, or host, providing a concise explanation of why the American Revolution is a turning point in history. The American Revolution wasn't just the birth of a nation, it was the dawn of a new era. It sparked ideas of liberty, self-governance, and equality that would ripple across the globe for centuries. This was more than a war for independence. It was a fight for the ideals that define modern democracy. Tease the content. End the introduction by giving the audience a preview of what they'll learn in the video. In this video, we'll uncover the causes that fueled the revolution, meet the extraordinary figures who led the fight, and explore how this war shaped the world as we know it today. Let's dive into the story of the American Revolution. Causes of the American Revolution. 1. Background. The 13 colonies. Under British rule, in the 18th century, the 13 American colonies were part of the British Empire, ruled by King George III. While the colonies enjoyed some autonomy, they were expected to obey British laws and policies. The colonies were thriving economically, but they depended on Britain for trade, protection, and governance. However, tensions began to rise as Britain imposed strict controls over the colonies. To pay off debts from previous wars, such as the French and Indian War, 1754-1763. Taxation. Without representation, one of the primary grievances of the colonists was taxation without representation. They were taxed by the British Parliament, where they had no elected representatives to advocate for their interests. Key acts that sparked outrage. Stamp Act, 1765. Required colonists to pay a tax on paper goods, like newspapers, legal documents, and playing cards. This was the first direct tax on the colonies. Tea Act, 1773. Allowed the British East India Company to sell tea directly to the colonies at a reduced price but still included a tax. This angered colonists as it undercut local merchants and reinforced Parliament's right to tax. The colonists felt these taxes were unfair, as they had no say in the decisions being made about them in London. Their slogan became, "No taxation without representation." Tensions. Build over time, small protests and political debates escalated into larger acts of defiance. The Boston Massacre, 1770. A confrontation between British soldiers and colonists. In Boston turned violent when British troops fired into a crowd, killing 5 colonists. This event was used as propaganda to rally colonists against British oppression. The Boston Tea Party, 1773. In response to the Tea Act, colonists dressed as Native Americans boarded British ships in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of tea into the water. This act of protest angered the British government, leading to harsher punishments. The Intolerable Acts, 1774. Also known as the Coercive Acts. These were a series of punitive laws passed by Britain to punish Massachusetts for the Boston Tea Party. These laws included the closure of Boston Harbor and restrictions on colonial self-governance, further uniting the colonies against Britain. First steps toward revolution. As tensions reached a breaking point, the colonies began organizing to resist British rule. First Continental Congress, 1774. Delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies met in Philadelphia to coordinate a response to the Intolerable Acts. They agreed to boycott British goods and petition the king for redress of grievances. The battles of Lexington and Concord, April 1775. These were the first military engagements of the Revolution. British troops marched to Concord to seize colonial weapons, but they were met by local militia in Lexington. The shot heard round the world marked the start of open conflict between Britain and the colonies. Key figures of the American Revolution. American leaders: George Washington, commander of the Continental Army. George Washington played a pivotal role as the leader of the Continental Army. Despite having limited resources and facing one of the most powerful militaries in the world, Washington's leadership strategy and resilience helped secure key victories. His leadership at battles like Trenton, Princeton, and ultimately Yorktown cemented his status as the father of the nation. Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson was a key intellectual force behind the Revolution, authoring the Declaration of Independence in 1776. His words, particularly "all men are created equal," became a rallying cry for liberty and freedom, inspiring not only Americans but also revolutionary movements worldwide. Benjamin Franklin, diplomat who secured French support. Franklin's diplomatic skills were crucial in securing French military and financial aid, which was vital for the American cause. He charmed the French court and negotiated the Treaty of Alliance 1778, ensuring French troops, ships, and supplies would bolster the Revolution. Abigail Adams, advocate for women's rights during the Revolution. Abigail Adams, the wife of John Adams, was a strong advocate for women's rights and an influential advisor to her husband. In her famous letters, she urged John to remember the ladies when forming the new government, foreshadowing future movements for gender equality. She also managed the family farm and finances during the war, embodying the critical role women played on the home front. British figures: King George III, symbol of British authority. As the King of Great Britain during the Revolution, King George III was seen by the colonists as a symbol of tyranny. His refusal to address colonial grievances and his firm stance against independence united the colonies in their fight against British rule. General Charles Cornwallis, British general who surrendered at Yorktown, Cornwallis, was a leading British general during the war. Despite his early successes, his army was trapped and forced to surrender at the Battle of Yorktown in 1781, effectively ending the war. Other influential players: Marquis de Lafayette, French ally to the Americans. A young French nobleman, Lafayette volunteered to fight for the American cause and became one of Washington's closest allies. He played a key role in securing French reinforcements and contributed to the victory at Yorktown. Native American perspectives. Native Americans faced a complex dilemma during the Revolution. Many tribes sided with the British, who promised to limit colonial expansion into their lands, while others allied with the Americans or tried to remain neutral. The war's aftermath led to significant losses of land and autonomy for many native nations. African American perspectives. African Americans fought on both sides of the conflict, with promises of freedom and equality. The British offered freedom to enslaved individuals who joined their forces, leading thousands to fight for the crown. Some African Americans also fought for the Patriots, believing in the ideals of liberty and justice, though freedom was not always granted after the war. Figures like Crispus Attucks, one of the first to die in the Boston Massacre, and poet Phillis Wheatley, who wrote about freedom, were influential voices in the Revolution. Major events of the American Revolution. 1. Declaration of Independence, 1776. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, formally announcing the colony's decision to break away from Britain. Drafted primarily by Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration outlined the colonists' grievances against King George III and proclaimed their right to self-governance. Its most famous line, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal," became a foundational principle for democracy and human rights worldwide. This document not only rallied colonists but also sent a clear message to the world that the colonies sought full independence, not just reform. 2. Turning points in the war. A Battle of Saratoga, 1777, secured French support. The Battle of Saratoga is often called the turning point of the American Revolution. In October 1777, American forces, led by General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold, defeated British General John Burgoyne's army in upstate New York. This victory was crucial because it convinced France to formally ally with the American colonies. The Treaty of Alliance, 1778, brought French troops, ships, and financial aid, significantly boosting the American war effort and turning the tide of the war. B. Winter at Valley Forge, 1777-78. The Army's resilience. During the harsh winter of 1777-78, the Continental Army, led by George Washington, camped at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Conditions were brutal. Impact of the American Revolution on the world. Immediate effects. Birth of the United States as an independent nation. The most immediate and obvious impact was the establishment of the United States as an independent country. For the first time, a group of colonies successfully broke away from their parent nation and created a government based on Enlightenment ideals of liberty, equality, and self-governance. The new nation adopted a constitution, 1787, and the Bill of Rights, 1791, which enshrined individual freedoms, checks and balances, and the separation of powers. Inspired other revolutions, the American Revolution served as a beacon of hope for oppressed people worldwide. It showed that it was possible to challenge and overthrow authoritarian regimes. The French Revolution, 1789-1799. Inspired directly by the American Revolution, the French Revolution began as a movement for liberty and equality. French soldiers, who fought in the American Revolution, such as the Marquis de Lafayette, carried revolutionary ideals back to France. France's Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, 1789, echoed many principles of the American Declaration of Independence. Latin American independence movements, leaders like Simón Bolívar in South America were influenced by the success of the American Revolution in their own struggles for independence from colonial powers. Long-term impact. The spread of democratic ideals. The American Revolution promoted the ideas of liberty, equality, and democracy, which spread to Europe and beyond. The principles of self-determination and the belief in the rights of the people to choose their government became a foundation for modern democracy. It encouraged the rise of constitutional governments and the rejection of absolute monarchies. Influence on global politics and governance. The United States became a model for democratic governance, with its constitution serving as an inspiration for other nations. The revolution established the precedent of peaceful transitions of power and the idea that governments derive their authority from the consent of the governed. Over time, movements for independence in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean were inspired by the American Revolution's example of breaking free from colonial rule. Additional global ripples. Economic impact. The revolution disrupted global trade patterns, but also created new opportunities for commerce with the United States as an independent trading partner. Human rights movements. While the revolution did not grant freedom to all, e.g., enslaved people and women, its ideals laid the groundwork for future civil rights movements in the United States and worldwide. Challenge to imperialism. The success of the revolution challenged the dominance of European empires and inspired other colonies to envision independence. Conclusion 1. Recap the revolution's key themes. Begin by summarizing the journey covered in the video. The American Revolution was a defining moment in history, a fight born from grievances over taxation and representation, led by extraordinary figures like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. It was a war that transformed 13 colonies into an independent nation and inspired the world to dream of liberty and equality. Highlight how the revolution's causes, key events, and global impact made it one of the most significant turning points in history. Pose a reflective question. Encourage viewers to think critically about the relevance of the revolution's lessons in today's world. The American Revolution taught us the power of unity, resilience, and the belief in a better future. But its ideals are still evolving. What lessons can we learn today from this historic fight for freedom? How can we apply these principles to the challenges we face now? 3. Call to action. Conclude with an invitation for engagement and further exploration. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of the revolution inspired you the most? Share your ideas in the comments below. And if you're curious to learn more, check out our other videos exploring the revolutions and events that shaped our world. Add an encouraging note to keep learning. The story of the American Revolution is more than history. It's a reminder that the fight for freedom and justice is ongoing. Thank you for watching this video.